Okay, so another characteristic of functions that we're going to talk about is end behavior. And by end behavior, essentially we are talking about what is happening at the ends of the function in either direction. Okay? So as with some of the other things we've already talked about with functions, our focus is going to be on the x-axis, okay, our x-axis, and essentially the question we're going to ask ourselves is, what is happening with the function when the x is approaching negative infinity or positive infinity? Okay? First, let's talk about positive infinity. When x is getting larger and larger, meaning when we move in this direction, we're moving towards positive infinity. Okay? The way we say that symbolically is we're gonna put x and then an arrow and then a positive infinity. And that means x is approaching infinity. We're also going to look at x as it gets smaller and smaller going this direction, and when in that case it's approaching negative infinity. Symbolically, we call that x approaching negative infinity. That's how we say that. Okay? So here's how we determine what's actually going on in those two situations. First things first, we say, okay, as x is approaching infinity, okay, the idea is this. Find somewhere that's around the middle of the function. So in case you can't see it, here's our function. Okay, it looks like this. Arrows on the end. The middle of our function is somewhere around here, right? So the question becomes, as x approaches positive infinity, so that means x is moving this way. Okay, I'm moving this way, moving this way. I don't know why that's erasing as I'm going up. But here's my function. I'm moving toward infinity. Infinity is over here. As I move this way, I'm approaching positive infinity. So as x approaches positive infinity, my y values are also approaching infinity. Okay? Because remember, my y values, that's my up and down. Okay? So as my, once again, here's my function. As x approaches infinity, y also approaches infinity because it keeps on going up. Let's talk about negative infinity. So now I'm starting at the middle, but I start going this way. I'm going towards negative infinity. As I approach that way, what's going on with my y values? My y values are going down. So as my x approaches negative infinity, which means the left side, my y approaches negative infinity as well. And they will not always be the same, so don't think that they will. Let's look at another example. Okay, so here's my function. My function looks like this. Even though there's not arrows down there, we're going to assume that it's going that way. Let's start by looking at x approaching infinity. So right about here is the middle of my function. I want to see, okay, as I move this way to positive infinity on the x-axis, as I move that way, what is happening with my y values? Well, they are, once again, my y's are approaching negative infinity because they're going down. This thing is going to continue to go down. As I look at my x values as the x approaches negative infinity, now I'm going the other way from center. I'm going this way. I'm working toward negative infinity. And as I go this way, well, it turns out that once again, my y values are going down. So my y values are approaching negative infinity again. So when you have this frowny face, both ends are going down to negative infinity. If you just had a smiley face function, both ends would be approaching positive infinity. In our first example, one was going up, one was going down. So as x approached positive infinity, the y values were going up. As x approached negative infinity, the y values were going down. Let's look at this one. This one's a little different. So let's start by looking at x approaching infinity. So here is my function. It looks kind of funny. I have a piece of the function that goes here, and I have another piece of the function that goes here. So the middle of my function is right there around 0. So if I want to ask myself what's happening as the x approaches infinity, well, infinity is up here, right? Negative infinity is over here. So as x approaches infinity, my function is approaching this dotted line. My function is approaching a y value of 0. Okay, it's not going straight up into the sky. You know, it's not going up here. It's getting closer and closer to a y value of 0. Right? This is a y value of 0 right here. That's what it's approaching. As my x approaches negative infinity, which is over here, I'm going this way, going this way. Once again, I'm approaching this dotted line. I'm approaching 0. So you may have y, approaching way up in the sky. In our last example, this is just going straight up into the sky. Or, in our second example, it's going straight down. In this particular example, the end behavior is approaching the line y equals 0. Y is approaching 0. Okay.